What's happening in Ukraine is a repetition of what we've seen in Syria. So says the head of global rights watchdog Amnesty International. Speaking at the launch of the organisation's annual report, Agnès Callamard accused Russia of turning humanitarian corridors into death traps, a tactic she says was also used in Syria and Chechnya. She also hit out at the UN Security Council for failing to act adequately in the face of atrocities, saying there was no room for neutrality when dealing with Moscow. Well, to discuss this and more, we can cross live now to Johannesburg to speak with Agnès Callamard, Secretary General of Amnesty. Agnès, you're condemning what's described as war crimes in Ukraine. Tell us, what kind of incidents have been documented and what can the world do to ensure that these kind of crimes aren't being committed in the future?
Look, the country is on fire, I think is the best way of describing it. For the last 5 weeks, Amnesty International has been documented indiscriminate and most probably deliberate targeted of civilian and civilians' infrastructures. We have monitored the use of certain weapons which have a very high range of impact, meaning that they are far more lethal. We have documented the fact that the humanitarian corridors are not working, that people who are trying to take them may be trapped. So all in all, what the situation is amounting to is definitely very close or possible war crimes.
And you're also critical of the response from the UN Security Council. But what can it do if Russia can veto resolutions and if certain countries aren't even taking part in the votes?
Look, this is exactly the point. Ukraine is coming after a litany of failures on the part of the multilateral institutions and the superpowers to take their responsibility seriously. This is why we are talking now frankly of an insecurity council. Throughout 2021, the Security Council has been unable to address conflict in Myanmar, in Ethiopia, in Israel, and now through the use of veto again and again in Ukraine. What this is pointing to is a failure of those multilateral institutions and our failure at reforming them. We have been warned time and time again since Syria, if not earlier than that they are not effective. What more do we need?
And Agnès, obviously we're talking an awful lot about Ukraine at the moment, but it's important not to forget other conflicts that are happening around the world. You've mentioned Syria there. There's also the war in Ethiopia, in Afghanistan. What kind of findings does your report make in relation to those places?
Well, in 2021 has seen an escalation of armed conflict, either old conflict that did not stop or new conflict that have taken to new height and new severity. The most serious one at the moment, if I may use this term, is certainly what's happening in Ethiopia, where massive human rights violations have been committed by both parties to the conflict. Again, throughout 2021, the international community has failed to respond effectively to those conflicts, paving the way in many ways to the insolence of Russia, to its aggression of international law in the early months of 2022.
And several countries are singled out in the report for putting, as you say, power and profits ahead of people. You talk about repression, surveillance, cracking down, for example, on social media, Russia amongst those countries. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. At a time where, frankly, the international society needs more debates, more engagement. Last year, we have seen up to 67 countries adopting new laws to curtail freedom of expression and freedom of association, often in the name of the COVID, but for other objectives as well. From Russia to the United States, from Europe to South Africa, every countries, every regions of the world. Hong Kong, that has seen a really worsening of the situation in 2021, a muzzling of dissent, a muzzling of critical voices at a time when they are most needed. That was 2021. 67 countries have adopted repressive laws in 2021.
And Agnès, we were told by politicians during lockdowns that we had to come out of the COVID pandemic differently, to a more equal society, to build back better, so to speak. Has that happened in your view?
This is the biggest betrayal. 2021 is the biggest betrayal of the people. Remember, in the early months, we're going to build back better. They did not. They did exactly the opposite. They put the profit of a few companies ahead of the people. By the end of 2021, only 8% of the population of the lowest income countries had been vaccinated. The global economy is on its knee because we were unable to address the COVID crisis globally. And it is on its knee as it is now confronting a war in Ukraine, which will have ripple effect everywhere through food crisis, through a fuel and gas explosion. It is a betrayal of the people. Meanwhile, a few, very tiny, have made a fortune. Do you know that the two largest pharmaceutical companies have made $54 billion of interest? 54 billions. And look at those poor people dying on the edge of a hospital doors. That is the reality of 2021, the betrayal of the people.
And what about briefly just access to vaccines, Agnès? That's something that the UN has been quite critical about, the World Health Organization as well.
I mean, you know, the UN has called for a global approach to a vaccine from the beginning, the WHO, until they were blue in the face, in fact, with no impact. They're now trying to do something here in South Africa by establishing a lab system of production of vaccine in South Africa. But the 5 largest pharmaceutical companies are refusing to participate to it. As for the trip waiver, you know, this thing that would allow the knowledge to be spread around the world, that too has not been done. That too is being held up by those selfish individuals and companies and states that are keeping the knowledge of the vaccine instead of spreading it as a global public good. That is, yet again, the reality of 2021.
Okay, we will have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time this morning, Agnès. That's Agnès Callamard, Secretary General of Amnesty International. Thank you.